I have a confession to make. Back in August 2020, right after the Blasphemous Stir of Dawn DLC came out, I did an interview with creative director Enrique Cabeza. I wrote a script about the Stir of Dawn DLC that included the interview, and then I never made the video. The interview and its contents remain trapped in a Word document on my computer until now. I recently stumbled upon this pandemic-era relic and found that not only is the information still interesting for fans of the first game, but it also gives some of that delicious dev insight that we can use to consider how the Game Kitchen might be approaching the upcoming sequel. Let's get into it. The first question I asked was if the Stir of Dawn DLC was something the Game Kitchen had in mind during development, to which Enrique responded, Stir of Dawn is something that we planned to do, and it contains lots of things. Some of them were Kickstarter stretch goals, like New Game Plus mode, others were improvements to the game in general, like the map system that we are proud of, improvements to the graphics in some areas, and much more. When designing the New Game Plus mode, we wanted to make it different from other video games, so that not only would the difficulty change or there'd be a fresh variety in the way to play, but there would also be additional content interesting enough for players to enjoy. So we thought of Laudes and the Amanecidas as additional bosses for the New Game Plus mode, with their own storyline that players could gradually unveil as they progress. We think that gives the New Game Plus mode way more value. We wanted the story of Laudes and the Amanecidas to have a connection with the rest of the lore of the game, as well as being a special opportunity to continue telling more and more about Cvstodia, its characters, and events in a way that shows how everything is connected. I played Blasphemous at launch and I enjoyed it greatly, but man, did the Stir of Dawn DLC and the Wounds of Eventide DLC add so much to the game, not only in terms of new content, but also in terms of improving existing content. I personally find that kind of dedication and passion to a game very endearing, and it is exciting to imagine how far they will be able to take a sequel, given how far they were able to take the original game in the years after it launched. The other thing that stuck out to me about Enrique's explanation is how Laudes and the Amanecidas were an opportunity to further build out the world and make the story of the Penitente even more robust in the process. Laudes worshipped the Twisted One so intensely that she exuded a liquid gold that created 4 replicas of herself, and as the 5 Dawns guarded the procession of the Twisted One. When the Twisted One passed on, the higher wills grew jealous of her devotion to him instead of them, and they imprisoned the 5 Dawns in crystal sarcophagi, holding them in undeath until they had further use for them. And we will discuss more examples of characters being kept alive for future use, but that is something I'll discuss in another question. I enjoy how this acts as both another story in the world of Cvstodia, as well as furthering characterizing the High Wills, something that they would go on to explore even further in the Wounds of Eventide. Speaking of the world of Cvstodia, we see small signs of regrowth and hope through the building improvements and increasing everyday life within the town of El Barro over the course of the game. So I asked if Cvstodia might be able to bounce back after the Grievous Miracle, and if the vaguely mentioned Outer World is better or worse off than Cvstodia. Enrique answered, I like the idea that these cursed places stay somehow frozen in time, hence the idea that the events of Blasphemous unfold during an eternal sunset, which is on one hand beautiful as well as melancholic, but on the other hand still a curse. That way any change in the world or in the characters is more shocking and thrilling. I cannot imagine Cvstodia being prosperous and full of joy, but I do imagine it somehow evolving while maintaining its essence as a land of superstition and eternal mourning, while always remaining under a curse. Assuming the Game Kitchen's stance has not changed since this interview, this answer leads me to think that we are not done with Cvstodia in the sequel. Cvstodia is a place frozen in time, always remaining under a curse, and I have a feeling the Game Kitchen isn't done exploring it yet. I really like Enrique's description of Blasphemous as taking place during an eternal sunset. The game's atmosphere nails the vibe of being on the edge of complete destruction, and the melancholy that accompanies that through the color palette and music do a lot of work to set the tone. I also think that it is very astute to observe how any changes in a world like this have more impact. To quote Elden Ring director Hidetaka Miyazaki, "Light looks more beautiful in darkness. When there is something beautiful in the middle of a wasteland, we are able to appreciate it more. One jewel doesn't look like much when you have a pile of them, but if you find one jewel in the midst of mud, it is worth so much more." Blasphemous and the Dark Souls series both truck heavily in this mindset, and that is why small things like life appearing in Albero have such an impact and almost make you yearn to see the world before it was ruined. You know what else is blasphemous? Not using ExpressVPN and sending data over an unencrypted internet connection. We might not live in the world of Blasphemous, where the grievous miracle is snooping around our every thought and action to see what kind of cruel punishment it can bestow upon us, but all the information we send out over an unencrypted internet connection can be seen and intercepted by countless different parties before arriving at their intended destination. A VPN or virtual private network creates a secure tunnel between your device and the internet. In other words, not even the grievous miracle is getting at your information. They mask your device's unique IP address, making it much more difficult for corporations, scammers, and advertisers to match your activity back to you and collect your data. On top of that, ExpressVPN gives you unrestricted access to all parts of the internet, no matter your region. To get ExpressVPN, click the link below, and when you use my link, you will get your first 3 months free. I also asked Enrique what inspired the characters introduced in the Stir of Dawn DLC, to which he responded, "I can tell you that Nacimiento is inspired by a scene from the film Gozu by Takashi Miike and the Oscar Wilde classic The Picture of Dorian Gray. It is also conceptually related to the Desamparados character that appears in the Blasphemous comic, which introduces the story of the Penitent One. Nacimiento is a large man with the youthful face of a boy on his head and the visage of an old man on his chest, who Nacimiento refers to as the Ancient One. Nacimiento tells us he is cursed by the miracle, offering to help reinforce the Penitente's bile flasks using quicksilver found out in the world, in the hopes that this might reduce the magnitude of his curse. As the Penitente brings more quicksilver, the Ancient One begins to emerge from Nacimiento, and his story culminates with the Ancient One birthed from Nacimiento's chest. So how do these inspirations play into Nacimiento and his story? The Picture of Dorian Gray is a classic, but for those unfamiliar, it is a story about a man named Dorian Gray who owns a portrait that will bear the effects of aging and the iniquities of his hedonistic lifestyle. As a result, the portrait becomes hideous and grotesque, while he remains young and beautiful. The second reference, the character of Desamparados in the Blasphemous comic The Kneeling, stands in contrast to the story of Dorian Gray. She wears a portrait of her youth and beauty upon her back, while her body continues to degrade and become more decrepit and skeletal. And finally, the last inspiration is the 2003 horror comedy Gozu. It is very clear which scene Nacimiento's story was inspired by, but you'll have to use your imagination because I absolutely cannot show it here. At the climax of the movie, spoilers for a 20-year-old movie coming up, a woman named Ozaki births her adult male self as he crawls out from her, and the outstretched pose the Ancient One makes as he breaks free of Nacimiento is very similar to the pose male Ozaki makes as he leaves female Ozaki. What a sentence. The through line for these stories is the division of aspects of oneself. In the case of Gozu, the inspiration is from the visuals of the scene, while Enrique cited The Picture of Dorian Gray and Desamparados as conceptual inspirations, which deal with the division of youth and purity and age and corruption. In the case of Dorian Gray, he was a willing participant, intentionally using the portrait to absorb his corruption. Again, spoilers for a 133-year-old story, but in the end, filled with guilt and rage, Dorian tries to destroy the portrait by stabbing it, and is found dead as an old man stabbed in the heart. In contrast, both Nacimiento and Desamparadas have been cursed by the miracle to bear this disparity in their visages. In the case of Desamparadas, she tells us that she has been chosen, her purpose to be a guide and scholar in the ways of the miracle. This is speculation, but it seems to me that her youth has been preserved in the canvas so that she may continue in undeath as a guide for the miracle, to lead our protagonist to mea culpa and give him the title Penitente as shown in the Blasphemous comic. In the case of Nacimiento, he increasingly bears the visage of the Ancient One on his chest as his face gets younger. Following the logic in the picture of Dorian Gray, impurity is being transmuted onto the Ancient One while Nacimiento remains young. His role in the game is to upgrade the Penitente's bioflask using Quicksilver. In the game, Quicksilver is described as a sphere of liquid silver touched by the miracle, brought to Cvstodia by alchemists from distant lands, back when the roads were still open and the wagons left furrows in the mud. In the right hands, its latent healing powers could be revived, but alas, the art of alchemy was lost many eons ago. Could it be that Nacimiento, who has become more youthful as he has gotten older, is old enough to have practiced the art of alchemy eons ago? At the very least, we know that he can in fact practice alchemy to revive the latent healing powers of Quicksilver to strengthen the bioflask. From there, I don't think it's too much of a leap to then suggest that he is eons old, and that the Ancient One embodies his extended life. I would suggest that Nacimiento was also being kept alive unnaturally in order to do the bidding of the miracle and aid the Penitente, and that when he was finished, he was finally able to birth the Ancient One and his own death and cross into the dream. And I also have one more idea regarding Nacimiento's story. The lore for Quicksilver states that it leaks through and hides under our feet, only to then sprout again free of impurity. It is your choice, my son, to pick them up or leave them, but beware of the purpose you put them to. This is purely my own theory given what we discussed here, but part of the alchemical process may involve purifying the Quicksilver. And, similar to Dorian Gray's portrait, the Ancient One absorbs this impurity. As the Penitente gives Nacimiento more Quicksilver, the Ancient One is further pushed or labored, as if the process of absorbing the impurity is the catalyst by which he is finally birthed, and Nacimiento is freed of his curse. And there you have it, new information from an old interview. If you enjoyed this video and want more Blasphemous content, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. At the very least, it'll help me make sure that I never sit on an interview again. And if you also like Elden Ring content, I do plenty of that. Right now we are waiting both on Blasphemous 2 news and Elden Ring DLC news, and I will be covering new information as it releases, as well as exploring the lore and story of these games. Sorrowful be the heart, and thanks for watching.